Literacy practices and how they have impacted my life. Stephanie Motta, Professor Pompous, ENC 1101, October 5th, 2015. My name is Stephanie, and every day, whether I realize it or not, I go through multiple literacy practices that have impacted and changed my view on what is literacy. Literacy practices are applications of an ideology that involves reading and writing. If you're curious as to what ideologies are, that can be defined as a system of beliefs or values. The literacy practices I take part in have shaped me into the reader and writer I am today. I will now talk about 3 of the literacy practices I have taken part in that have impacted me. The main literacy practices I have been taking part are writing my very own poems, having a conversation in French, and learning to drive. My love for poetry, I would say, started after reading some of Edgar Allan Poe's work. A past literacy sponsor of mine would have us read poems out loud, and some of those poems just happened to belong to him. This literacy sponsor benefited from this by encouraging us to write our own poems for the school magazine. A literacy sponsor, defined by Brand and Sponsors of Literacy, is any agent that supports, teaches, or models along with regulating literacy and gain by this somehow. For example, my teacher would be a literacy sponsor by regulating what her students can and cannot read. She did this by requiring us to read a book for the quarter, but the book you chose had to pass by her. If it wasn't a classic piece of literature, it was not allowed. With this, I will start with poetry and how writing my very own poems have been a significant literacy practice that has shaped me as a writer. Well, one of the most important things about poetry is comprehending the different styles of poetry. For example, free verse or a haiku, both of these types of poetry require different techniques. Another important aspect when it comes to writing poetry is knowing word construction and where to place the words so that the poem flows. This is very important when you are writing poems where every other line's ending word rhymes. This style, I would refer to the structure as ABAB format to show which words in the poem that are matching. Then there's knowing concepts such as syllables and what words rhyme depending on the type of poetry you are writing. Going back to the haiku example, the specific type of poetry requires 3 lines, the first and last being 5 syllables long and the middle being 7. Writing poetry is something very enjoyable for me that involves multiple literacy practices as mentioned before. This task specifically has helped me analyze literature effectively and improve my understanding of reading and writing in a greater depth. A huge influence I had was being a part of the Journalism Academy at my high school, along with creative writing courses. At least with speaking in French, which is another one of my literacy practices, it had a relation to an earlier literacy event for me, making it a bit easier to comprehend. Well, a literacy event is occasions in which written language is integral to the nature of participants' interaction and their integrative process and strategies. Let's say, as a child, your parents would read you bedtime stories. Well, in my case, my parents didn't do this, at least not that I remember. Instead, due to my mother's Haitian background, it was by nature that she would speak in Creole. Though I do not speak the language myself, growing up I learned words, phrases, and sentences. When taking French class throughout middle school and freshman year of high school, it was clear how similar the languages were to each other. I think the relation between French and Creole is one of the main reasons I decided to pick up on learning French. Many words were the same, with little differences, and this recognition assisted in shaping me into a more literate speaker when it came to having a conversation in French. My literacy event made the literacy practices within speaking French a bit easier. When having a conversation in French, it involved reading and writing in order to get the point where it was spoken. I had to read the textbook for my French course, which are shown on the screen throughout all of middle school and my first year of high school, know the difference between masculine and feminine words, and then writing out possible conversations you could have as practice. If you are not familiar with French or any other language that uses the same applications, you may not know what I mean when I say masculine and feminine words. Though in English we also have masculine and feminine words such as queen or boy, but as for French, all nouns have a gender. This has made it critical when writing or speaking that the proper preference are being used. If not used correctly, it could be completely wrong and not make any sense. Due to this, I believe speaking French has shaped my understanding in the importance of grammar for not only reading and writing, but also speaking. Now, some may not think of learning how to drive as being a literacy practice. Most would not expect this since it is a physical task. So you may ask, how exactly is driving a literacy practice? Well, it is the steps you take to learning how to drive that make it a literacy practice. For instance, before I received my permit, I had to pass the practice test that required that I have some knowledge in the different aspects of driving. I was able to do this by reading this starter guide here. Another aspect you need to be literate in when it comes to driving is recognizing and understanding the different road signs and road rules. There is the basic stop sign, which we have all seen before, but there's so much more out there than you would expect. I am able to comprehend all of these with the help of the driver's handbook. Not only do you have to be able to know what all of the signs mean, but I had to be able to recognize those signs and their meaning on the spot when doing quizzes, along with driving on the actual road. Then there was practice questions available for me to take to put the knowledge I just acquired to the test. This is a prime example of a literacy practice because it takes all of the past information learned from reading the book and involves one to go back to what they learned and recite the information. Though driving seems to be a physical task, it only becomes physical after these literacy practices have been done. There are numerous amounts of daily events that involve literacy practices, whether it goes noticed or not. We have seen how poetry, speaking French, and learning to drive have all been significant literacy practices in my life. These three have specifically shaped me as both a reader and writer today. Not only have I learned how common literacy practices are and the importance of literacy practices, but now they have become something very enjoyable and used in my everyday life.